Good morning. On this Labor Day 2023, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 14. And this, again, talks about church life, about community, of how we build each other up and how we encourage others or maybe invite others even to faith. And yesterday or Saturday, talking about chapter 13 with the love chapter we is referred to so often. But again, I mean, it's written for a community of believers, of examples of how to work together and live together. And today starts out, yesterday or chapter 13 ends with, and the greatest of these is love. Chapter 14 begins, pursue love and strive for spiritual gifts. And chapter 12, it ended, with strive for greater gifts. And so now Paul is going to talk about spiritual gifts. And it's some reminders that, sometimes our gifts are just for us, and sometimes they are for others. He says, for those who speak in a tongue do not speak to other people, but they speak to God. And he says, for nobody understands them, since they are speaking in mysteries of the Spirit. And he says, on the other hand, people who prophesy are speaking to the people for their upbringing and encouragement and consolation. He says, those who speak in tongues build themselves up, but those who speak in prophecy build up the church. And, in prophecy, remember I said a while back, prophecy isn't just predicting the future, or, not even really, I don't know if I should use the word predicting, but, prophecy is talking about things that haven't happened. But also prophecy is just proclaiming the word of God. And we do that every day, in our actions and in our speech. So the prophecy is to build each other up, and this is, speaking to each other. Conversation, we could probably say, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch to just say that it's conversation, but it's in speaking so that others hear and understand. And by hearing and understanding, they may come to belief in God. And this is, Paul gets to that point that speaking in tongues is for the believers. Speaking in prophecy, speaking these words of love, encouragement, are for unbelievers. So that an unbeliever, by hearing the words of love and grace and encouragement, the prophecy, the proclamation, maybe is a good word to use, will come to know God that way as well. He said, verse 5, I'd like all of you to speak in tongues, but even more to prophesy, whichever way you want to say it. But to speak words of encouragement, words of love, And then one who prophesies is greater than one who speaks in tongue, unless someone interprets the tongues. So again, speaking in tongues has no value to the church, to the people, to the community, unless someone can interpret that. And, and he says that, if I come speaking in tongues, how will that benefit you unless I speak some revelation or knowledge? And then he goes on and talks about how lifeless images, like flutes and trumpets, and if they don't make a distinct sound, what good do they do? If you hear a bugle, but you don't know if it's a call to arms or an all clear or what it is, if it doesn't make a distinguishable noise, it's pretty useless. And he says, verse 9, so with yourselves, if in a tongue you utter speech that is not intelligible, how will anyone know what's being said? For you're just speaking into the air. And again, if we don't understand, and even sometimes, I'm speaking in English, but if I use words that nobody knows the meaning of, I could just as well be speaking in tongues. We need to understand, and we need to, not dumb it down, so to speak, but to make it understandable. And that's, I mean, most of you remember, or maybe remember, being in school and having a teacher that all of a sudden this made sense to you. They could explain it in a way that was easy to understand, enjoyable to understand, that you could get something out of it. And you know, if they didn't bring it to you in plain language, understandable language, it didn't make sense. And that's some of the modern math and some of the different things that way are really, you know, just crazy. And even some of the old math rules that, unless you've been taught so that they make sense in your mind, you know, and that's with the resurrection. That's with the forgiveness of sins. I mean, so much of this, what we teach about Jesus, you know, sounds kind of far-fetched. I mean, that he could heal someone with just a touch, that he could, you know, just speak a word and something would happen, that he would die and God would raise him from the dead. Some of this stuff doesn't make sense, you know, to a cognizant mind. And so we need to figure out a way to speak it so that people can understand it. It makes sense to them. And that, I mean, why would God love me? I mean, it makes no sense in so many ways. But I'm a part of God's creation, just as you are. And God looks at creation and says it is good. And he, you know, cares for his creation. Verse 13, the one who speaks in a tongue should pray for the power of interpretation. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unproductive. What should I do? You know, I mean, so it's, unless we can understand, it doesn't help us. Verse 20, brothers and sisters, do not be children in your thinking, but be infants in evil, but in thinking be adults. You know, and so, you know, to be cognizant of the difference between right and wrong, and to make proper decisions that way. Verse 22, tongues are a sign not for believers, but for unbelievers, while prophecy is not for unbelievers, but for believers. So, I mean, you know, as we speak and as we talk about God, it makes a difference who our audience is, who we're talking with, and how we should come to them. Verse 27, again, he says, if anyone speaks in a tongue, let there be one or two at a time, and let each in turn interpret. But if no one interprets, let them be silent. It does no good. I mean, it's just for show. I mean, and you know, showmanship doesn't always pay off in the end. I mean, you gotta, you know, it's the old, you know, nobody likes to show off. I mean, in so many ways that way. So it's to come and to be working together for the good of all. Now, there's a parenthesis, you know, in the middle of verse 33, as in all churches of the saints, and then the parenthesis ends at the end of verse 36, and it's, you know, sometimes rather than here, this was the last few verses of this chapter, but it stands. I mean, women should be silent in church, so they not be permitted to speak. They should be, but they should ask their husbands at home if they want to know so. However, remember in chapter 11, verse 5, but any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled disgraces her head. So, I mean, any woman who prays or prophesies. So here in chapter 11, it was okay for a woman to speak and to pray in church as long as her head was covered. So there's a little discrepancy here. And again, you know, for women to be silent in church is just unrealistic expectation. I mean, we got some really good women pastors and really good women teachers, and you know, and there are a lot of women that know the Bible a whole lot better than I do. And, it's just, we need to respect each other and each other's ability to speak, authority to speak, and the opinions and the knowledge that we have. And to say that anybody, can't speak in a public gathering in a church is just backwards in my mind, because we are all to work together for the good of community, and this is one of the main points that Paul is talking about in this letter, is to work together for the good of all. Sometimes it's not that easy, but it's what God would have us do.